The autumn morning carried an unusual heaviness across Britain, as news anchors struggled to maintain their composure. Prince William stood at the window of Adelaide Cottage, watching the golden leaves drift past while his phone buzzed incessantly with calls from palace officials. The previous evening had brought devastating news that would shake the very foundation of the monarchy and touch every corner of the Commonwealth. Catherine sat quietly at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The children's laughter echoed from the garden where they played, blissfully unaware that their world was about to change forever. She watched her husband's shoulders tense as he spoke in hushed tones with his private secretary, discussing arrangements that no one ever wants to make. The palace had received confirmation that Queen Elizabeth II had passed peacefully at Balmoral Castle, surrounded by her closest family members. At 96 years old, she had lived through decades of change, serving as Britain's longest reigning monarch. Her death marked not just the end of an era, but the beginning of a new chapter that would test the royal family's ability to comfort a grieving nation. William turned from the window, his eyes meeting Catherine's across the room. Without words, they both understood the weight of responsibility that had just shifted onto their shoulders. As the new Prince and Princess of Wales, they would need to guide the country through its mourning while processing their own profound loss. The woman who had been a grandmother, mentor, and symbol of stability was gone. Television screens across the nation displayed the official announcement as citizens gathered in stunned silence outside Buckingham Palace. Flowers began appearing at the gates within minutes, carried by people who felt compelled to pay their respects. Children clutched handmade cards while elderly visitors wiped away tears, remembering the young princess who had promised to serve them faithfully on her 21st birthday. Inside the cottage, William made the difficult call to tell George, Charlotte, and Louis that their beloved Gangan would not be coming to visit anymore. Catherine knelt beside them as they tried to understand why the special lady who taught them about duty and kindness had gone to heaven. Their innocent questions about whether she would still wear her crown in the clouds brought both smiles and tears to their parents' faces. The couple knew they had just hours before the world would expect them to appear publicly, offering comfort and strength to millions of people who would be looking to them for guidance. Catherine excused herself to change into appropriate attire, choosing a simple black dress with pearl earrings that had belonged to Diana, knowing that every detail would be scrutinized and remembered. As evening approached, they prepared to make their first public appearance as the new Prince and Princess of Wales. William straightened his black tie while Catherine applied a subtle touch of makeup to conceal the evidence of tears shed privately. They held hands briefly in the doorway, drawing strength from each other before stepping into their new roles as senior members of the royal family during Britain's darkest hour. The Black Range Rover moved slowly through the streets of Windsor as thousands of people lined the pavements, many holding flowers and Union Jack flags. William and Catherine could see faces pressed against barriers, some crying openly while others stood in respectful silence. The car's windows were lowered slightly so they could acknowledge the crowds who had gathered. Despite the late hour, when they arrived at Windsor Castle's Long Walk, the scene was breathtaking and heartbreaking simultaneously. A sea of floral tributes stretched as far as the eye could see, with candles flickering like stars against the darkening sky. Messages written on cards fluttered in the gentle breeze, expressing gratitude for 7 decades of service and love for the woman who had been Britain's constant companion through joy and sorrow. Catherine stepped out of the vehicle first, her heels clicking softly on the ancient stones. She wore a simple black coat that had been hastily altered by palace dressmakers to ensure appropriateness for the somber occasion. William emerged beside her, his navy uniform crisp and formal despite the emotional toll of the day. Together, they began their slow walk among the mourners who had come to pay their respects. An elderly woman approached them tentatively, clutching a small posy of roses from her garden. Her voice trembled as she told Catherine how the Queen had visited her village school 60 years earlier, and how that day had remained the highlight of her childhood. Catherine listened intently, placing a gentle hand on the woman's arm as tears streamed down both their faces. The simple gesture of human connection spoke louder than any formal statement could have. Children who had been lifted onto their parents' shoulders called out sweet messages, waving drawings they had made of the Queen wearing her crown and smiling. William bent down to speak with a young boy who had dressed in his school uniform out of respect, complete with a miniature Union Jack pinned to his blazer. The prince's genuine interest in the child's handmade card created a moment of warmth amid the overwhelming sadness. A group of Commonwealth veterans stood at attention as the royal couple approached, their medals gleaming under the streetlights. William shook each man's hand individually, listening to brief stories about serving under the Queen's commission and the pride they felt in their monarch's dedication. Catherine spoke quietly with their wives, acknowledging the sacrifices military families make in service to the crown. The crowd grew larger as word spread through social media that the Prince and Princess of Wales were personally greeting mourners. People traveled from neighboring towns, bringing their own tributes and hoping for a moment of connection during this historic time. The police worked carefully to maintain order while allowing the spontaneous outpouring of grief and respect to continue naturally. As they made their way through the growing memorial, William and Catherine frequently paused to read messages aloud, sharing touching tributes that had been left by ordinary citizens. A letter from a young mother thanked the Queen for being a constant source of strength during difficult times, while another note from elderly twins recalled meeting her during a wartime visit to their bombed neighborhood in London's East End. The emotional turning point came when William and Catherine encountered a small girl, no older than 7, who had been waiting patiently with her grandmother for over 2 hours. The child wore a miniature version of the Queen's Guard's uniform, complete with a tiny bearskin hat that kept slipping over her eyes. In her small hands, she clutched a carefully crafted crown made from golden cardboard and plastic jewels. Catherine knelt down to the child's level, her black dress spreading around her on the cool ground. The little girl's grandmother whispered encouragement as the child shyly presented her handmade gift, explaining that she had spent all afternoon making it because the Queen should have a crown in heaven too. The innocence and thoughtfulness of the gesture caught Catherine completely off guard, and for a moment, the composed princess struggled to maintain her composure. William watched his wife's emotional response and felt his own carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. He had been trained from birth to remain stoic during public appearances, to be the steady presence that others could rely upon during crisis. But seeing Catherine's genuine reaction to the child's gift reminded him that sometimes showing vulnerability could be more powerful than projecting strength. The crowd around them fell silent as they witnessed this unguarded moment between the royal couple and the little girl. Smartphones were lifted to capture the scene, but the atmosphere remained respectful rather than intrusive. People seemed to understand instinctively that they were witnessing something authentic and beautiful. A reminder that grief shared is somehow more bearable than grief carried alone. Catherine accepted the paper crown with trembling hands, promising the child that it would be placed somewhere very special where the Queen could see it. The little girl beamed with pride before suddenly reaching up to hug the princess, a gesture so spontaneous and pure that it took everyone by surprise. Catherine held the child close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and feeling the fierce energy of youth and hope. When they finally separated, Catherine wiped away tears that she no longer tried to hide. The crowd began to applaud softly, not for royalty performing their duty, but for human beings sharing a moment of connection across all boundaries of class and protocol. William stepped closer to his wife, placing a protective arm around her shoulders as they both looked down at the precious gift they had been given. The grandmother, overwhelmed by the kindness shown to her granddaughter, began to cry openly. She shared that her late husband had served in the Royal Navy and had spoken often of his admiration for the Queen's dedication to service members and their families. The connection between generations, between ordinary citizens and their monarchs, felt tangible in that moment as William listened respectfully to her memories. News cameras from around the world captured the exchange, But the footage would later be remembered not for its formal significance but for its emotional honesty. The image of Catherine holding a child's handmade crown while tears streamed down her face became an instant symbol of shared grief and the continuity of love that transcends death. Social media exploded with comments about the princess's humanity and the beautiful simplicity of the little girl's gesture. As word of the touching encounter spread across social media platforms, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Videos of Catherine accepting the child's crown were shared millions of times within hours, accompanied by heartfelt comments from people around the world who felt moved by the genuine emotion they had witnessed. The hashtag A See Our Own for Heaven began trending globally as people shared their own memories of the Queen and stories of kindness. Back at Adelaide Cottage later that evening, William and Catherine sat together on their living room sofa, still processing the events of the day. The handmade crown sat carefully on their coffee table, its golden cardboard slightly bent from the child's eager handling but somehow more precious than any jewel in the crown collection. They spoke quietly about the responsibility they felt to honor not just the Queen's memory, but the trust that millions of people had placed in them. Catherine shared her concerns about whether she had shown too much emotion in public, wondering if her tears had been appropriate for someone in her position. William reassured her that her genuine response had been exactly what the nation needed to see, explaining that the Queen herself had often said that the monarchy's strength came from its ability to connect with ordinary people's experiences of joy and sorrow. Television news programs across Britain began their evening broadcasts with footage of the royal walkabout, focusing particularly on the moment with the young girl and her crown. Royal commentators noted that Catherine's emotional response marked a significant departure from traditional royal protocol, suggesting that the new generation of royals might approach public grief differently than their predecessors. International news outlets picked up the story, contrasting the warmth of the British royal family with more formal monarchies around the world. The French press wrote extensively about Catherine's moment of grace, while American networks featured the story as their lead international segment. Even Republican newspapers found themselves moved by the authenticity of the exchange. Meanwhile, the little girl who had started it all was at home with her family, completely unaware that her simple act of kindness had touched millions of hearts. Her grandmother helped her understand that the pretty lady in black had been very sad about losing someone special, just like they had felt when Grandpa died. The child nodded solemnly before asking if the Queen would really wear her crown in heaven, a question that brought fresh tears to her grandmother's eyes. Social media platforms filled with stories from people who shared their own encounters with members of the royal family, creating an outpouring of positive memories that helped balance the collective grief. Teachers posted photos of classroom projects where children had made their own crowns and cards for the Queen, while community leaders organized local memorial services inspired by the royal couple's example of accessible mourning. The Archbishop of Canterbury called the palace to commend William and Catherine for their handling of the public's grief, noting that their willingness to show vulnerability had created space for others to express their own emotions freely. He suggested that their approach reflected a mature understanding of leadership that embraced both strength and compassion in equal measure. The following morning brought an unexpected development that would further cement the royal couple's connection with the public. Catherine woke early, unable to sleep after the emotional events of the previous day. She found herself thinking about the little girl and her grandmother, wondering how they were coping with all the attention their simple gesture had received. After discussing it with William over breakfast, Catherine made an unprecedented decision. She asked her private secretary to arrange a private visit to the family's home, away from media attention and protocol requirements. The palace staff initially expressed concerns about security and precedent, but William supported his wife's instinct that this was the right thing to do. Later that afternoon, a modest car pulled up outside a small terraced house in Windsor, carrying Catherine and a single protection officer. The princess wore jeans and a simple sweater, looking more like any other mother than a member of the royal family. She carried a small gift bag containing books about the royal family that she thought the little girl might enjoy. The grandmother answered the door with shock and delight, quickly inviting Catherine inside for tea while trying to tidy up toys and papers scattered around the living room. The little girl emerged from behind the sofa where she had been hiding, still shy but curious about her royal visitor. Catherine settled onto the floor beside her, immediately putting the child at ease by asking about her other artistic projects for nearly an hour. They sat together in the cozy living room while Catherine listened to family stories and answered the child's endless questions about palace life. The grandmother shared photographs of her late husband in his naval uniform, pointing out medals he had received during his service. Catherine examined each picture carefully, asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest in their family history. The little girl proudly showed Catherine her bedroom, which was decorated with pictures of horses and castles that she had drawn herself. When asked about her favorite subject at school, she announced that she wanted to become a princess when she grew up so she could help people feel better when they were sad. Catherine's heart melted at the innocent declaration, and she gently explained that anyone could help others feel better, whether they wore a crown or not. During their visit, Catherine learned that the family had been struggling financially since the grandfather's death, and that the grandmother worked 2 part-time jobs to support her daughter and granddaughter. Without making a show of it, Catherine quietly arranged for palace staff to ensure the family would receive ongoing support through various charitable programs, though she asked that this assistance remain private. As she prepared to leave, the little girl presented Catherine with another gift, a drawing of the two of them sitting together with the Queen watching over them from a cloud above. The simple crayon artwork captured the pure heart of a child who understood that sadness shared becomes more manageable, and joy shared becomes multiplied. Catherine treasured the picture, promising to frame it and keep it in her office. The visit remained completely private until weeks later when the grandmother, overwhelmed by the continued kindness she had received, shared the story with a local newspaper. She wanted people to know that the future queen had taken time from preparing for a state funeral to sit on a living room floor and comfort a grieving family, showing that true nobility comes from actions rather than titles. 6 months after the Queen's funeral, the impact of that emotional evening at Windsor Castle continued to resonate throughout British society and beyond. The handmade crown, now carefully preserved in a glass case at Clarence House, had become a symbol of the new monarchy's approach to connecting with citizens during times of national significance. Catherine established a new charitable initiative inspired by her encounter with the young girl, focusing on supporting families dealing with grief and loss. The program provided art therapy sessions for children, helping them express complex emotions through creative projects similar to the crown that had touched so many hearts. The little girl from Windsor was invited to the program's launch, proudly wearing a real tiara that Catherine had specially commissioned for her. Educational institutions across the Commonwealth began incorporating the story into their curricula, using it to teach children about empathy, leadership, and the power of simple gestures to create meaningful change. The cardboard crown became as recognizable as any royal artifact, featured in textbooks and documentaries about modern monarchy's evolution. Toward greater accessibility and emotional intelligence, William often reflected on how that single moment had changed his understanding of royal duty. In speeches and interviews, he spoke about learning that strength could be found in vulnerability, and that the most effective leadership sometimes meant stepping down from pedestals to meet people where they are. The couple's approval ratings soared as the public recognized their authentic approach to service. The grandmother from Windsor became an unexpected advocate for veterans' families, inspired by Catherine's example to speak out about the challenges faced by military widows. Her story encouraged other families to share their experiences, leading to improved support systems and recognition for the sacrifices made by service members' relatives. She often credited that tearful evening as the moment when her grief transformed into purposeful action. International royal families took note of the British approach, with several European monarchs adopting similar strategies for connecting with their citizens during national events. The story was studied in diplomatic academies as an example of how personal authenticity could strengthen institutional legitimacy, proving that genuine emotion could be a powerful tool of statecraft. As the first anniversary of the Queen's death approached, William and Catherine returned to Windsor Castle for a memorial service. The same elderly veterans, many of the same families, and thousands of new mourners gathered to honor her memory. This time they were joined by the little girl, now 8 years old, who had grown into a confident child advocate for other young people dealing with loss. During the service, Catherine wore the pearl earrings that had belonged to Diana, continuing a tradition of honoring family history while building new legacies. The cardboard crown sat in its place of honor at Clarence House, visited by thousands of tourists who came to see the simple artifact that have reminded the world that even queens and princesses are, at their core, human beings capable of being moved by love and generosity. The story became part of British folklore, told and retold as an example of how genuine human connection transcends all boundaries of class, age, and circumstance. Children grew up hearing about the little girl who made a crown for heaven and the princess who cried when she received it, learning that true nobility lies not in titles or wealth, but in the courage to show compassion when it matters most.